Welcome back, guys, here on Birds 365. We're lucky enough to have, did he disappear on us? No, I saw him there. He was in the green room.
Damn, I couldn't hear us, so we're trying to log him back in. He couldn't.
That's an issue. We'll try and get him back up. Paul Schwartz. I've known Schwartz for, holy smokes, 40 years? Somewhere
40
there.
years? Whoa.
Yeah. When we get him up, he'll confirm this. I've known Schwartz that long because we both were graduates of the State University of New York at Albany.
All right.
We're fellow Great Danes. Of course, he was working at the newspaper at the college. I was working on the radio station at the college. And Schwartz, they haven't figured us out yet. We've been faking them for 40 years now, and they haven't booted either one of us, have they?
Jody, hey, John, how are you? Yes, I did work at the radio station in Albany too. But I did work there too, but I figured with competition like you, I better get my writing skills in order and dance with what brung you sort of thing. So yes, we're both here, and it's amazing. We look remarkably like we did in college. Oh wait, maybe the screen is not. Maybe it's a little fuzzy. Maybe I'm not seeing correctly.
That would be a bold-faced lie, but thank you for the attempt, Mr. Schwartz. Hey, P.S. When last we saw the Giants, they were leaving the field from Lincoln Financial Field. They haven't been beat by the Eagles in the playoffs. Giants had a hell of a year. We're going to talk to you about their whole offseason, but they had a hell of a year last year. First one, new coach, make the playoffs, win a playoff game on the road against the Minnesota Vikings, but then it ended here in Philadelphia. And let's be honest, Eagles beat the Giants kind of handily 3 times last year. Bad matchup between the two teams with the fact that the Giants had as good a season as you had. You thought they'd be more competitive against the Eagles. The Eagles were the best team in the NFC, but the games between the two teams weren't really all that competitive. Why do you think that was?
Well, Jody, the Giants were 1-5-1 against the division last year. That they lost 3 times to the Eagles in 6 weeks. Lost to the Cowboys twice, tied the Commanders, and beat the Commanders. So, it's an NFC East problem. But, yeah, I mean, the last regular season game, the Giants were playing their backups. Jalen Hurts was just getting back into gear, right? He was not really himself, yes, and that was a close game. So, I guess the Giants can say, well, if we played our starters, it was a close game with Davis Webb. But, yeah, I mean, look, the playoff game was a non-competitive event. The Eagles are clearly better than the Giants. I think the main thing is the offense and defensive lines of both teams. Eagles were probably the best in the league, right? If you just line up offensive line, defensive line as units. The Giants could not say that last year. And, they tried to do some things to help rectify that. And look, a lot of teams had problems with the Eagles. And, yes, the Giants, before you can think about glory, you got to, win these fights in your own backyard. And, yes, the Eagles don't. Put it this way: the Giants, when they made moves this offseason, definitely had one eye on the Eagles, no question about it.
Paul, you mentioned those. That's kind of what the Eagles are known for, building up front on both sides of the football. Really, since Andy Reid got here in 1990, that's sort of been their foundational principle. It's not often sexy, but it works. When you can block people, you can get some things done offensively, and vice versa if you can't block people. It's been a while for the Giants, but I was finally, I don't want to go overboard, but Andrew Thomas is turning into a really good player. Evan Neal's got a ton of talent. They're starting to turn the corner on the offensive line. And Dexter Lawrence, I thought he was one of the best players in the NFL over the last month or so. He dominated the Vikings in that playoff game. Some nice steps for Brian Daboll, Joe Shane in year one. Fair to say?
Yeah. I mean, look, the Giants agree with you. They gave Dexter Lawrence a $90 million contract. You know what I mean? Averaging $22.5 million a year or something. So yeah, Dexter Lawrence, Leonard Williams is a really good player up front. He had some injury problems last year. He's very steady. They drafted last year Kayvon Thibodeau to be an edge rusher. He had a good rookie year, not crazy good, but certainly good. Their other edge rusher, Azeez Ojulari, was basically had a wasted year with injuries. So, that's an issue. The Eagles grow these guys on trees, and they draft them high, they draft them low, they sign them, they just cultivate them, they come at you in waves. The Giants do not have that yet. You mentioned Andrew Thomas. Yeah, he will be. They don't have to do it this year. If all goes well this year, he'll be one of the higher paid left tackles in the league next year. And look, they drafted a center, John Michael Schmitz, to be their starting center. So it's coming on the offensive line. Evan Neal, the guy they drafted number 7 overall out of Alabama to be their starting right tackle. He's a guy you plug in and say, for 10 years, I don't want to worry about right tackle. Well, he was not great last year. He's promising. He's huge. But he had some growing pains, much like Andrew Thomas did his rookie year. So, playing the Eagles twice or like they did 3 times, these are incredible lessons for these guys. So, yeah, the building blocks are there, but it's just not there yet. That's all.
The building blocks always start with the quarterback position. And the Eagles got their guy locked up this offseason, Jalen Hurts, as did the Giants. And although there was a lot of talk about it both in New York and Philadelphia, what are they going to do? I had the prediction dead on accurate. They're going to throw the franchise tag on him and then move from there. They did and got it done. Not as big a deal as Hurts and Lamar Jackson, some of the superstar quarterbacks, but a fair deal and a pretty good commitment to Daniel Jones. Is it a given that he's going to be the Giants quarterback for X amount of years going forward? And if so, how many is X?
Well, there's no givens, right? He's their quarterback this year. There's no givens just because of the nature at that position now. Teams just don't wait anymore. I mean, really, this was listed as a 4-year contract for $160, right? Really, it's a 3-year contract averaging $37.5 million. That's what it is. After 3 years, they can get out of it with very little harm done. So I guess if you want to say, now you're giving me the hives. I'm trying to think of this is algebra now, right? Solve for X. Solve for X.
Sorry about that. Yeah. I knew that Albany education would pay off for something, doing math with your buddy Johnny Mac 40 years later.
Yeah, that's why I went into writing, okay? Because I had a hard time solving for X, right? Well, X is 3 years, really. Now, I'm not saying he's guaranteed to start for 3 years, but, the debate with Daniel Jones was not, is he worth 35 or 40? Because if you look at it, if you think you have a mid-level or you have can we agree he's not maybe a top 10 quarterback yet? And he's not a bottom 10 quarterback yet. Can the three of us agree with that right now? Yeah. So if you want a quarterback who's 11 to 15, let's say, you have to pay him $37.5 million a year. Yeah. That's just the way it is right now. So, can he be more than that? The Giants think so. So, he didn't get Jalen Hurts money. He got commensurate money for a guy who's like the 13th or 14th best quarterback in the league, who's your starter. Now, he was only 1 year with Brian Daboll. He did well. He stayed healthy. They're going to have to get his running down. I think just like Jalen Hurts a little bit in Philly. You can't have these quarterbacks running all over the place because they're too valuable and it's too dangerous. Jalen Hurts is a more athletic guy than Daniel, although in a foot race for 40 yards, I mean, Daniel's really fast. He's a fast guy, but they have more weapons this year. We'll probably get into some of those. They have Saquon back. He's their quarterback, and the surprising thing to me was last year they did not pick up his 5th-year option. Joe Shane came in and Brian Daboll came in. The first decision they made was we're not picking up his 5th-year option, which would have only been $22 million for this year. So it was absolutely 100% prove it to us. We didn't draft you. You're a good guy, but we didn't draft you, and we just won't keep you if you can't prove it. He proved it. So if fans love what Joe Shane and Brian Daboll brought, then I think they have to at least trust, especially Daboll. Daboll's a quarterback's guy. He didn't have to sign off on Daniel Jones, and he did.
Yeah, and you're right. I mean, that's the cost of doing business at that position in the NFL right now. But if you want to get him from 11 to 15 to top 10, I think the best way to do it is to help them with weapons. Have they done enough? I mean, Jalen Hurts deserves all the credit in the world for his step forward, but don't dismiss A.J. Brown, man. We saw that up close. What a difference he made for this offense is sort of the final piece of the puzzle. Everything fit into place. The Giants seem to be carpet bombing wide receiver, Paul, but I don't see any. I mean, they drafted Jalen Hyatt. They brought in Paris Campbell. You still have Slayton back and Sterling Shepard will be back healthy. I like that kid Hodgins, but he's kind of limited, from an athleticism standpoint. And they did bring in Darren Waller, who, but he's been injured. He's proven, but he hasn't done it for a while. Do you think they've helped Daniel Jones enough? Are there enough weapons on this team? And then Saquon, who hasn't signed his franchise tender, correct?
Correct.
So
He has not signed it.
Yeah.
Look, very few guys sign their franchise tag in April and May. Why should they, right? He's not at the offseason workout program. I think there's probably a 50-50 chance they come up with a 3-year deal for him. Joe Shane offered him at the bye week, offered him after the season. It got up to around $13 million a year. I think Saquon was getting bad info from his reps that did not foresee that the running back market was just not going to be there. The running back, look at Miles. What did Miles Sanders get in the open?
6.5, and he was number one on the free agent market.
Now Miles Sanders is not Saquon Barkley, but they finished close they both had 1,200 yards. Did Sanders get up that high? Did he get
1269 and 11 touchdowns?
Yeah. So I mean, what did that say? In other years, he would have gotten $14 million. It's just not the way it works anymore. So they did a bad job with that. And a player has to suffer when his reps don't do a good job, right? And Saquon's suffering a little bit. I think they could come up with something. As far as the weapons, that's a good point you made, John, about carpetbagging wide receiver. You know what the Giants didn't do? The Giants loved Zay Flowers, right? They loved them. He wasn't there. The four receivers went off the board for the first time in history, 4 in a row, right? The Giants were going to take a couple of those. When they didn't, they pivoted to really what is their number one need, cornerback, and they took Deonte Banks of Maryland. So that was fine. But what the Giants didn't do was force it. They didn't go out and pay a Kenny Golladay $72 million, which the previous franchise, the front office did. They didn't say, you know what, we need a receiver. We're just going to take the next one on our list, at number 25 or trade up to 24 to get him, because they weren't worth it, So that was good. Darren Waller is the guy. He is the weapon, whether you call him a receiver or a tight end. They gave up a 3rd-round pick for him, and you're right. For the last 2 years, he had hamstring problems. He was not on the field much, and he wasn't a great player. 2 years before that, he was just like any of these other great tight ends that we talk about. He was right up there. So the Giants, they can hope they can get 85% of that, and he will be the big difference.
Little roll of the dice with Darren Waller. Agreed.
Yeah,
I know you and I discussed this. Could have been off the air. Could have been on the air on radio somewhere else. Because I was surprised. Well, I wasn't surprised because guys like Paul Schwartz were reporting it before it ever happened, that the Giants decided to part ways with James Bradberry. And the Philadelphia Eagles thanked the Giants for that profusely, because Bradberry came in here and it was great for Philadelphia. They got themselves in a salary cap situation. New GM came in, had to sign the rookies. Somebody had to go, and they chose Bradberry. Give us the backstory. Give our Eagle listeners the backstory on that. Why Bradberry was the guy they singled out. Knew somebody was going to become a cap casualty. He ended up being the guy signing here, having a great year here, re-signing here. How did Bradberry's days at the Giants come to an end?
Well, he played well. It wasn't because of performance. He was the highest paid guy, pretty much. And yeah, they got in terrible cap situation. They had a new regime change, and they just couldn't. It just, Joe Shane came in and looked at it and said, we don't have the luxury of having James, and Adoree Jackson, the other cornerback, makes good money too. Not Bradberry money, but he makes good money. So he just looked at that and said, we can't do it. Somebody has to go. Now, you know how it is. On your own team, you're not going to accept a pay cut. On another team, you may take a little less, right? And you guys have seen Bradberry for a year. He's like a baseball player, right? He is what his stats say. Is he a great leader? I mean, no. Is he a great personality? No. He is a automaton cornerback, which is not bad. I think Darrelle Revis was that. You know what I mean? They go out and they try to shut down the other team, and then they bring their lunch pail, they bring their briefcase. I mean, I thought his reaction after the Super Bowl was classic James Bradberry. He's a
Yeah,
really good
I
player.
grabbed his jersey. He admitted to it. You're right.
I'm right. I mean, everyone in Philly was outraged,
Yeah,
except for the
James is
guy
like
who did
James.
it.
Yeah,
Except for
he's
did it right. And I remember, you guys, this is an inside like journalism thing. My office was emailing me and texting me, because I'm writing sidebars on the Super Bowl, and they're saying, you have to go crazy with the outrage in Philly. You have to write that this was a terrible call and this is awful and this cost him the game. And I said, okay, and I'm getting ready to write it. And then you go talk to James Bradberry, and I call the office, and I email him and I say, I don't know if we can be more outraged than James Bradberry can, because he's not outraged, And they're like, well, it's an outrage. And I said, well, I know there's outrage, but the player said, yeah, I did it, and I wish they didn't call it. So. Look, that was good by the Eagles to pick him up, that they had the money to do that. The Eagles always seem to come up with the money. Joe Shane just looked at it and said, we just can't pay him. It's not they didn't like the player. And once they got rid of him, that became the biggest hole on the team. And It was the biggest hole on the team all year. So it's not like they had a plan to replace him. They didn't. They just, now, what the replacement is this year? Deontay Banks.
Deontay Banks, by the way.
Yeah.
By the way, I thought it made sense from the Giants' perspective. They're bringing in Wink Martindale. They need press corners. James is a great zone corner, smart, savvy. You're right, Paul. He is even keeled, man. He was like, yeah, I did it, but I was hoping they didn't call it.
And you're right. It was not a great scheme fit, although he's a really good player. He's just
really good player.
Look, would Wink have wanted him? Yes, because there was nobody there better than him. But I think when they looked at it, they said, well, he's not a great scheme fit, so we can't afford him anyway. So it has to happen that way. It worked out great for the Eagles, and it would have been better if we went to the Chargers, and then the Giants wouldn't have to worry about him. But that's what happens.
And by the way, I think Deontay Banks is one of the most natural fits when you put team and player together, because I think he's a perfect corner for Wink Martindale. I want to talk about Wink because I don't know if you know this, Paul, but Eagles fans, I'm not going to say love Wink Martindale, but they want him to be their defensive coordinator because he's like the only guy in the league with that old school mentality of aggression, rush, blitz. How is he sort of taken in New York? How did the Giants fans look at Wink Martindale?
Well, if you see a bunch of middle-aged guys walking around with sleeveless, long sleeve, whatever he wears, I mean, he is. Look, they love him. I mean, now look, they didn't win the Super Bowl, so they're on their way to loving him. Look, Wink is a good personality. Now he's not. When he came in, people tell me, "Oh, he's Rex Ryan." He's not Rex Ryan. He is not a crazy interview. He's a fun and delightful interview, but he doesn't ever bash the other team. He always praises his team, his guys. If somebody screws up, he kind of couches it, but he's a delightful guy. He had this thing at the start of the season. He didn't do it much later in the season where he would compare guys to other guys. And he would compare guys. I loved it. We would have loved it, all three of us, because he compared guys to guys who played in the 60s and 70s, and half the people who there were like,
who's that?
I don't know who that is.
Can you spell that for me?
But it was fun. But look, he's a very aggressive. His players like him. He emboldens his players. He is a this is what I think you can do, and I'm going to let you do it, player. He's not, you can't do that, so we have to limit you. Now he substitutes. They had more substitutional, changes than any team in the league last year, I think, on defense. So he was big on, okay, not so good on second down, we'll replace him. But he had to do a lot of that, and I think he'd like to do less of that if he had a better core. Which is, they had a big problems with their interior linebackers, their inside linebackers all year. So he had to move guys, down to down. He had to switch guys a lot. But, Wink is a very colorful guy. Like Mike Kafka had like 4 or 5 interviews to be head coach, the offense coordinator, but he's much more vanilla, much more buttoned down, 35 years old. Look, Wink wants to be a head coach. He just wants to be a head coach. He says, I have a great job here as a defensive coordinator for the Giants. Daboll pretty much leaves him alone. He is the defensive guy. He wants to be a head coach, so he wants to do well. He wants to be colorful. He wants to be good with the media so he can get a chance.
All right, along those lines, you watch every snap of all 17 Giant games. I watch most of them, and certainly every snap of Giants-Eagles.
Yep.
A guy who I thought played well for them last year, specifically games I watched, and the games against the Eagles that the Giants couldn't find a way to win, but it wasn't, in my opinion, this guy's fault. they let Julian Love walk out the door, which I was a little surprised by. And Seattle made him a good offer. It wasn't like the Giants were pushing him out the door. They just got outbid for his services. I thought he did a nice job for them at safety in the secondary last year. Was it close for him staying? Did they think they have someone ready to step right in? How big a loss is Love in the D backfield for the Giants?
Well, you guys must have something in Philly, like the good guy award. You give something to the guy who's the best with the beat writers, the media.
Yeah.
Julian Love was our good guy award winner. So that was a tough blow when he left. I mean, he was a locker room. You go to him, win, lose, draw, which they did, draw once last year. And he was a great quote, a very personable. He got it. He was a guy who was made for New York. He's a kid from the Chicago area, so it's not like the city was a problem for him. And there's a couple of things. First of all, they had a ceiling with Julian Love because they have Xavier McKinney on the team, who they're going to make the highest paid safety next year. So they know they're not going to go crazy with Julian Love, knowing we have Xavier McKinney sitting in the wings, so we're going to make the higher paid safety. They liked him a lot. Joe Shane told me that he made him what he thought was a better offer. Okay, so it wasn't like they felt we got outbid. The Seattle gave him way more money. I don't know exactly how it was structured, but Shane said we gave him, our offer was more money. Okay, but Julian was getting some bad information, and maybe it was structured a little differently or something. Maybe they showed him more love. Joe Shane is kind of a tactician. He doesn't show a lot of love, but then he gives what he thinks is proper. So I think they thought they were going to keep Julian Love. It wasn't like we're moving on from him. They gave him an offer they thought was good. The safety market also was not great, right?
Yeah.
Safety and running back was not great. So these guys who were hoping for 10, 12 million, they weren't going to get it. So, we'll see. Seattle's far away, and, he's going to a team. We'll see how that works out. But the Giants thought that they gave him a better offer and that Julian just didn't take it. We'll see how it works out. But it's not like they didn't like him. They did like him.
Mm-hmm.
Paul, you mentioned Julian Love, obviously probably their biggest loss in free agency. Their biggest gain, you were mentioning that inside linebacker position. I don't want to butcher the kid's name, so help me out. Bobby Okereke from Indianapolis. They gave him a lot of money, and you're not supposed to give off-ball linebackers a lot of money unless you're the Chicago Bears. Was it that bad that they felt they had to overpay, or do you think that was a real need and it was a good contract?
No, I believe it's Okereke. Okay.
Okereke.
Okereke. I got to practice that too.
Yes. You just call him Bobby. Call him Bobby.
Bobby. Yeah. Bobby O.
Bobby O. Yes, like not Bobby Ojeda, right? Bobby O. Right? Bobby O. Well, yeah, they gave him $10 million a year. That's probably a little steep for an inside linebacker. They needed him. They needed someone. Don't forget, last year at this time they had Blake Martinez, who the previous regime of Joe Shane, he was their Captain America. He was their guy. Yeah. He was a team captain. He had 140 tackles. He was their spokesman. We had a season through Zoom. Every time they lost, there was Blake Martinez on Zoom, explaining why they lost. He was the good soldier. And, he was not a good scheme fit. He got a little hurt. He had an ACL before that, and then he didn't want to play. And now he just sold what is it? Not Yu-Gi-Oh. What's the other card? He sells these cards. He went to the Raiders. He retired, and he sells these cards, Yu-Gi-Oh cards or whatever. These cards. He sold one for $1 million. So
no,
wow,
yeah. So he's.
I did not know that.
He's opening trading cards and making money. So more power to him, right?
Yeah.
But that was a rough position for them last year. They tried Jalen Smith from the Cowboys. He was okay. So this guy is a quote unquote tackling machine. He had 150 tackles for the Colts. I think he's only 26, so he's got years. He's bigger. He's a little bit of a more physical guy, and he can cover the tight end a little bit. This was a complete need. Wink said, I need this. I just need a guy I can count on. He can play 3 downs. I need him. So they gave him 4 years, 40. It's not crazy money. It's not crazy money. It's maybe a couple of $1 million higher than you want to spend there, but sometimes you got to fill a hole any way you can.
I know the most of the guys that I trust that aren't New York writers. I trust Schwartz, but not when it comes to the Giants because he's going to give us the always look on the bright side of life answers. Not true. He actually will rip the Giants when necessary. I'm just busting his chops. But most of the national guys that I read post-draft report cards on thought that the Giants had one of the better drafts. The Eagles as well as an A draft, but the Giants got a lot of A grades as well. How much does the Schmitz pick at center make the Giants draft? They needed a center. They got a guy who's probably going to step in, get plugged in year number one. How important was he to the Giants draft? And overall, what do you think of the Giants draft?
Well, look, I always find it funny when these guys, A+. Yeah, because you picked the players that you like. You know, the Giants picked the players that you like, right? So like if there's a guy out there drafting and he says, I didn't like Jalen Hyatt at all, I wouldn't have traded up for him, then you're going to give the Giants a bad grade, right?
Right.
If you had Jalen Hyatt as a second round pick and the Giants got him in the third, they're geniuses, you know? So yeah, and look, I mean, the problem with the Giants was the Giants, a lot of people gave an A or an A+ for whatever that means. But the Eagles got like an A++, you know? So, you know, a lot of people thought like, oh my, how do they keep on, you know, they just have this pipeline to Georgia and they just keep on taking Georgia's best defensive player. So, you know, we'll see how it works out. I think, Jody, to your question, Deonte Banks, John, as you said, it was it was a big need. It was a great scheme fit. The receivers weren't there. You just take them. It was sort of an easy pick. I think if Banks wasn't there, Joe Schoen might have traded down instead of trading from 25 to 24, because he was like the last man standing on their board in that wide receiver cornerback group. So that was an easier pick. It made complete sense. Now, I think what made the draft I know in the Giants' minds that once they took John Michael Schmitz in the second round, they needed a center. I think they might have had Joe Tippmann slightly higher, but he went to the Jets. But I think it was fractions. You know, I think they were thrilled with either of the guys, and I'd be shocked if he's not their starting center. You know, as a rookie, that's tough. But I think what made it for the Giants is once they drafted John Michael Schmitz, they said, okay, now we're not going to get Hyatt. You know, we just have to assume we're not going to get Hyatt. He won't be there at 89. And right after they took him, Joe Schoen told everyone, you know what, let's see if we can get greedy here. Anyone out there, start making calls and see maybe what it will take to get up to get Hyatt. And it was Brian Daboll, actually, who sent a text to Sean McVay with the Rams. And McVay said, yeah, we might be willing to move off, 73. So the Giants went from 89 to 73. That's a big jump, right? You know, they gave up their fourth round pick because they thought Hyatt was a second round vertical threat, you know, better than most people thought. So I asked Joe Schoen directly after the draft, did you think you could get Schmitz and Hyatt in this draft? He said, I did not. And I did not see a window to get that until we started making all these moves. So what made the draft is, you know, like it's like anything, right? You guys cover the draft and then you hear fans, once they take a player at a position, right, the Eagles, then fans say, well, what about this position? And you say, well, you can't take two players at one position.
No, you can't. Yeah.
If you take a defensive player, then the need for the offensive guard you've decided what is more important. What's your priority? You may not get that guard then, right? You may just not get it. So the Giants,
last year,
the two players that they didn't think they would be able to get both of them. So that's what they were most happy about.
Yeah. You know how that works, Paul. Last year, the Eagles said, hey, it was between Cam Jurgens and Nakobe Dean in the second round for us. The Eagles default to offensive linemen. Magically, Nakobe Dean falls to third. We got the two players we wanted. It's funny how that always works out.
He was the highest player on our board. He was the highest player.
Always the highest player. Well, it should be, you know.
That's why you took him, because he was high on your board. Now
exactly.
Do we think board is worth a damn, right? You know, some teams say that all the time, and you say, well, you got a history of lousy picking. You know, the board stinks. You know what I mean?
Yeah. At New York Post _Schwartz. Make sure you follow Paul on Twitter. Get all the intel on a division rival. Does a tremendous job covering the New York Giants. Last one from me, because he's an old friend here in Philadelphia. Mike Kafka, you mentioned him earlier. 35 years old. I remember when he came, he was like a fourth round pick of the Eagles, Andy Reid. and he sort of got entrenched in, basically you're going to be a head coach if Andy gives you the approval.
Yeah.
I'm surprised he kind of moved away from Kansas City. I thought that showed a lot. I think he's ready to become a head coach in this league. You mentioned all the interviews. When Jonathan Gannon came here, Paul, Howie Roseman said, we're renting the guy. Turned out to be true. They had him for 2 years. Is there a similar feel with the Giants and Mike Kafka? Because it seems like he's on the fast track.
I don't think there was, John, when they hired him. That's a good question. You know what I mean? He was 34, 35 years old. I think they thought they were renting Wink Martindale. You know what I mean? If we have a good year, Wink will, he's that next thing. I don't think they thought we were renting him per se for a year, because Mike Kafka, let's face it, now he left Kansas City. He wasn't calling the plays in Kansas City, So I thought it was two things. It was Brian Daboll, as a first-year head coach, did some things. It shows he was 47 years old. He had been in the league over 20 years, and he did not make the mistakes that these first-year guys do. Pick guys pick guys you're comfortable with. He never worked with Mike Kafka before. And not only did he hire him, he had the intention to let him call the plays. Brian Daboll was a head coach in the NFL because of his ability to call plays.
Yeah,
right? And
I love that. I love CEO coaches. Jody will tell you that.
It was great.
Oh, yeah.
He was a complete CEO coach. And this was even in his first year. He's going to give up the play calling in his first year. He gave up to a guy he never worked with before. He wasn't his quarterback coach. He wasn't his offensive quality control. He was nothing. So the thing I would say about Kafka was he's very low key. So I can't speak to the fact that he's going to get up in front of a room as the head coach and be a kick-ass guy. I just don't know that, Now you don't have to be, but I don't know that. He lightened up a little better with us. But look, you know how it is with some of these young offensive coordinators or defensive coordinators when they're not. They are. You have to ask the head coach that. You have to ask the head coach that. They just want to stay in their lane and not make any news, right?
Oh yeah.
And Kafka was a little bit like that. But I will say, he has really, he may disagree with this. He played at Northwestern, right? And then he was a GA at Northwestern. And then he went to Philly, right? Didn't really play much, bounced around a little bit, got a connection with Andy Reid. Andy Reid hires him at Kansas City, right? He's in Kansas City for several years. He's a quarterback coach for Patrick Mahomes. Then the Giants hire him. He has really he's had a very linear, upwardly mobile, I don't know. If he's had adversity, I don't see it. As opposed to Brian Daboll, who was hired, who was fired, who's been offensive coordinator a bunch of places, had to go back to Alabama for goodness sakes. So I think Daboll, you can see the scars on him that he was ready to be a head coach. He was not this 35-year-old wonderkind. He was a 47-year-old hardened. I know what I'm going to do because I've seen all the mistakes I made. I don't know what mistakes Kafka's made. He's been, he working for Andy Reid. Let's sign up for this. If
you know what? It's interesting you say that, Paul, because I heard some of that with Doug Peterson, because Doug, long time backup, as we all know.
Yeah.
Then he got entrenched with Andy Reid, never left Andy Reid. Why would you leave Andy Reid's staff? That's what impressed me about Mike Kafka. And there was a lot of criticism here. Well, Doug doesn't know anybody about the assistant coaches. And all of a sudden he wins a Super Bowl. And by the way, now he's turned around another team.
Yeah.
So it can work both ways. But I hear what you're saying about the scars of, Brian Daboll's been through the ringer. I see both ways. But if I'm next to Andy Reid and I'm an offensive coach, I'm not leaving, because eventually, Eric Bieniemy aside, and there's some other issues there, as we all know, hasn't gotten a head coaching job. But basically, you're anointed when you're at Andy's foot. I was impressed that Mike left. I thought it showed a lot of self-confidence.
Yeah, it does. And look, Daniel Jones had his best year in most, by most metrics last year, right? And that's Daboll and Kafka, and him staying healthy. And so second year in the offense, if they do well, and at the end of this coming season, if nobody is saying Daniel Jones is way overpaid, Mike Kafka's leaving and getting a head coaching job. There's no question about it. Yeah.
P.S. Last one from me. Are you going to be able to sell to Mrs. Schwartz when you have to tell her you're going it alone on Black Friday because the Eagles and the Giants are playing, that, hey, I could have had to work in Dallas. I might have been in Dallas for the Thanksgiving game and then we wouldn't have even had a dinner. You're going to be able to make Thanksgiving dinner after you're going to get out early the next day to get to the stadium to watch the Giants and Eagles. Is Mrs. Schwartz going to buy that routine?
I was in Dallas last year on Thanksgiving.
See?
Okay? And you know what? And this is what I said. I hate being away on Thanksgiving. It's awful. I was in Washington one year for Thanksgiving. Okay. I didn't have to fly, but I knew, and if any of you guys have been right at AT&T Stadium, I knew at very least Jerry Jones would feed me.
Oh, it's awesome. Best spread ever.
Good
the
spread.
Thanksgiving meal he put out last year was, look, I didn't want to be away, but it cut no corners. Okay. It was like a I would say an old-fashioned Jewish bar mitzvah or wedding. It was laid out there.
Eagles fans get mad at me, Paul. I tell them nobody's Jerry's first class. Everything about that place is first class.
As far as I'm concerned, they could have the Super Bowl there every year because it's like it was built to have a Super Bowl. How many primetime games are the Eagles going to get this year?
5. The limit is 6. I think they'll keep 1 for flex purposes.
Keep one. Well, I think it's interesting because the Giants, last year they had one night game scheduled and they had the Thanksgiving game. That's it. They're better this year. They'll have more, but you have Aaron Rodgers and the Jets may get 5 or 6. They may get 5 also. Yeah. And so, it's going to be interesting how much they maybe don't want to have Giants, Jets, although they do play each other this year. So, look, Jody, what I'm banking on is that they play in Arizona, they play in Vegas, and they play in San Francisco this year. So the Giants have already asked, let's have 2 of those games back to back because we want the option of staying away. Okay, which I think the league will give them, and I think the Giants will do that. So whatever kind of Friday, Black Friday game I have to go to, I'm trying to see, let's see if we can swing it so the Giants are away for a week, and maybe my wife can come with me for a week.
There you go.
Vegas or San Francisco or Arizona.
And Paul, I say every year, if someone wants my votes and it's an election year, any administration that makes every game 1:00 Sunday, I'll vote for it. Every game, I want 1:00 Sunday. Yeah, I don't want any prime time.
The Eagles don't have a lot of 1:00 games on Sundays anymore.
I got to cover those things.
You'll be waiting a long time for that to happen, John McMullen. Prime time is where the billions of dollars are for the NFL. Oh, they'll be taking care
every
of
game. 1:00 Sunday.
Yeah, good luck.
And you know what? When the Rams won in 1999, right? No one thought they would win. No one knew who the heck Kurt Warner was. 15 out of 16 games Sunday at 1.
So we're now talking 23 years ago. John, I'm going to have to wait that long to get that kind of schedule going forward. Paul Schwartz, this was a lot of fun. Thank you much for doing it with us. We will certainly get you back up again as the season gets closer and continue to enjoy your off season, big guy.
Thanks, guys. I enjoyed it. Take care.
Paul Schwartz, New York Post, been covering the Giants since about as long as I've been doing radio, which is sneaking up on 30 years. I think Paul's 30th anniversary potentially is next year. But I've known him since the Albany State days back in the 80s. That's
Albany,
right.
The Great Danes, baby.
The Great Danes back then when they were a Division III powerhouse in both basketball and football. I even forget what the hell the conference they're in. It's like the subdivision. It's not top flight Division I, but they're Division I football and Division I basketball. Now, back in the day, they were Division III, which, hey, allowed me to play 1 year of basketball because if they were Division I was not going to be on Albany's squad. I can guarantee you that. He's John McMullen. I'm Jody McDonald, the Mac and Mac guys, Birds 365. We got BLG, Brandon Lee Gowton, going to join us in less than 20 minutes. So stay right